Doctor, doctor, give me the news. I got a bad case of Doctor Strange.
So Marvel has recently made something that was so incredible, absolutely mind-blowing, and so unlike everything that they've ever done. And not just that, but unlike any other superhero movie that I've ever seen. This movie gave me a feeling that very few movies have ever given me, and I left the theater feeling like a changed person and just wanted more from it. I'm just so grateful this movie exists. And I also saw Doctor Strange 2 on a totally legal website. Trust me, I'll talk about Morbius another time. But for now, I guess we have to talk about the much lesser Marvel legend that has arrived. Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness was not good. Like, really not good. Now in hindsight, I'm not really the biggest fan of the MCU. I'm really just not a fan of their formula and how repetitive a lot of their movies can be and just end up being so forgettable and mediocre. And it also doesn't help that like they're the only movies that come out nowadays. But the thing that absolutely angers me about this movie just not being good is because I was actually excited for this movie. Not only is this a sequel to one of their best films, but it also has a fantastic director behind it, and the trailers for this movie actually look really good. I was a little worried because of some of the mixed reviews, but for the most part I was really excited to see something that was much more different from the usual output. I thought Sam Raimi had this one in the bag and I was really excited for it. And well, it was really bad. And believe me, no one is more upset at this movie being so awful than me. I was really excited for this movie and I was actually hoping for something different. And while this movie is very much different from the usual MCU output, it was for all the wrong reasons in all the wrong ways. I guess I'll start with the positives because after all, this is a Sam Raimi movie, so obviously there's going to be some good stuff in it. I think the score was probably my personal favorite part of the movie. The MCU movies have mostly just been okay with their scores, but nothing really all that memorable, but they can be pretty talented here and there, and this was probably one of their best from recent memory. And while it's not the most scariest thing of all time like a lot of people are making out to be, this movie does do a decent job of having its horror elements. That problem then starts to become a negative, but I'll get to that. And while on the topic of positives that can also be seen as negatives, this movie does a lot of things that are completely unexpected and goes in places that not a lot of Marvel fans would be expecting. And this movie actually has a pretty good color palette and is entirely great like most Marvel movies seem to be. Who would have thought if you added color to some scenes you could actually make them look really good. And the CGI is an improvement from a lot of other MCU movies, but it also isn't. And that perfectly leads us into the negative section because, oh man, there is a lot to go over. And spoilers, I guess, because I will be talking about some pretty big plot points from now on. For starters, you can easily tell that this movie was in production hell. For a bit of backstory, the original director left because of creative differences and had to be rewritten because of No Way Home and had to be reached out multiple different times. And according to Raimi himself, about 40 minutes of the movie was actually cut from the final product. And you can definitely tell because so much of this movie just feels so just empty. I don't even know how to describe it. Now, the first like 20 minutes of this movie were actually not that bad. The action was pretty cool and I was actually really enjoying America Chavez's character and I was excited to see where they would take her. But it took one character for this movie to go completely downhill. I thought WandaVision was a pretty bad show. It was probably really cool as a concept, but it just doesn't really work in the way the series is formatted. I really liked the first 3 episodes because I thought it was going to dive deeper into Wanda's character and I liked the sitcom aesthetic and how we didn't really know what was going on. And you're probably wondering, if I like Wanda as a villain, why do I hate her in this movie? Because later in the series, this witch lady gets involved and it turns out Wanda isn't really the villain and she was just going through the 5 stages of grief, and despite her enslaving an entire town, she gets no consequences for it just because she learns to let go of her family at the very end. So Marvel basically took a boring character and decided to make her a villain, but then decided at the last second not to and make it seem like she was a hero the entire time. As messy of an arc as it was, at least she had the decency to close down the hex at the end. But here's where the problem with this movie comes in, because it completely ignores every bit of character development that Wanda even previously had in her own show. You see, instead of being upset over the character that she barely had any interactions with prior to one movie, she's now upset over the fake digital children that she knew for like 3 days. And travels to another reality where her kids exist because she thinks it's not fair that she can't be happy but others can. Then she goes from being slightly evil in WandaVision to an absolute monster. I will say this is the most interesting her character has been in literally anything MCU related. But it just seems like her character was barely thought through and they just entirely relied on shock value. The idea of seeing Wanda kill thousands of people may feel out of place for her character and not make sense with the story, but it is pretty shocking for the audience to witness. I really do like a lot of the horror aspects of the movie, especially in the third act, but it just feels like it's completely out of nowhere and relies entirely on shock value, like I said. Horror movies, and especially Raimi's Evil Dead movies, aren't just great because they have a lot of great scary moments. They're great because they also correlate well with the relevant narrative. And Doctor Strange 2 just doesn't even know what type of tone it wants to be or what type of movie it's really trying to tell in the end. The idea of the Darkhold and other versions of characters morphing in with different versions of themselves was just kind of poorly explained, and I could think of a movie that did this exact same concept much better. And what's weird about this movie the most is that I feel like the main character of this movie was the most underdeveloped and uninteresting. I mean, you just know something is wrong when the movie called Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness barely features much of Doctor Strange or gives him anything interesting to do. And the main thing in this movie is that he's still upset over Christine and what could have been of their relationship. Not only was Christine such a boring and forgettable character in the first one, it didn't really add much to it, but in the first movie wasn't his main arc letting go of Christine and accepting their broken relationship, realizing that not all things can be fixed. But in this movie, I guess they had to give Christine something since this is technically a Doctor Strange sequel, even though it's pretty much just a Wanda movie. And even though it's technically not the same one, she adds equally nothing to the story. For a movie called Multiverse of Madness, the way they handled the multiverse in this movie was just very underwhelming. Now, I'm not saying I wanted Deadpool and a million other cameos to show up, that would have made the movie much worse. But something about this movie just feels so limited, like Sam Raimi and the others couldn't really go as creative as they wanted to. Since this movie focuses so much on Wanda's not so good character arc, so much of this movie just focuses on Strange and Chavez just doing whatever in this other reality. For like the first hour, Doctor Strange in the Doctor Strange movie wasn't really doing that much. And then this movie introduces the Illuminati and this other Mordo, and oh my god. Well over an hour into the movie, it feels like stuff is finally starting to happen. Oh yeah, and the Illuminati was pretty dumb. I guess it's somewhat of a neat subversion on Raimi's end to introduce the X-Men and the Fantastic Four only to kill them off. It's actually a pretty risky move, it can make a lot of fans angry, so I can somewhat understand that. But the thing is, like I mentioned earlier, Strange doesn't really have much to do in this movie, and so when the plot finally feels like it's progressing, this just made the subplot just feel pointless. I guess it does lead to the evil Strange and the Darkhold and everything just being thrown together in the last 40 minutes. But besides that, the Illuminati's appearance in this movie was just kind of funny to me. I don't really know why. None of the actors in this group felt like they wanted to be here, and it just felt like a waste of time. And while I admire this movie for not relying on fan service like No Way Home does, it just kind of felt like just a dumb fan service moment to also subvert the audience expectations at the same time. Because the only real takeaway from this Illuminati subplot is Mordo, who has this really weirdly shot action scene with Doctor Strange afterwards. And the way that all of them got killed off in the dialogue in the scene, I was just wondering if all this was supposed to be comedic rather than dark and subverting. I mean, I kid you not, I literally started dying when Wanda removed Black Bolt's mouth and blew his brains out and then turned Mr. Fantastic into spaghetti. And then the Captain Marvel person just gets crushed by a giant statue. And it wasn't even that big, and she's supposed to be like the strongest person on the team or whatever, and then she just gets crushed by a giant rock. And then Captain British has the most cringe and poorly placed dialogue of all time, and then dies in the most weirdly shot way of all time. I really wish I could show you these scenes because it was that bad. At least from here, Strange and the others actually started doing something within the story, but by this point it just felt like nothing was already happening and they were just throwing everything together within the last 40 minutes. There was no build up to the climax, and this movie's runtime goes by way too fast. Everything was just thrown together in the last 40 minutes hoping it would stick. I will say that the climax was probably the best part of the movie and the thing that I enjoyed the most. But almost every single MCU movie, as bad as some of them can be, feel like they have a 3-act structure and proper build-up up to this climax. They have a story that just feels like it's going nowhere for like the first 80 minutes and just throw everything together in the last 40. When America Chavez joins Hogwarts at the end, I felt nothing. Because her character was nothing but a plot device to get from one point to the other. Her personality in this movie is that she's just reacting to things that are happening on screen. And by the time it ended, it just felt like I watched a 2-hour trailer for a much bigger movie. Oh yeah, Wanda dies in this movie and it's the most soulless death scene of all time because it seems like Marvel did nothing but their character over 5 movies in one show. She was evil, but then became an Avenger and then lost her android boyfriend, where she had like 1 movie where their relationship was set up. And then she becomes evil, but then she's good, and then she becomes really evil, and then she just fucking dies. And it's so obvious that Marvel's gonna find a way to bring her back. Overall, this movie was frustrating, but it's just kind of astonishing how bad this movie is, because unlike other bad superhero movies, it's not even fun to talk about how bad it is. It was just so empty and worthless and super disappointing. I don't blame Raimi because there was a lot of stuff that he added to the film that definitely made it not entirely unwatchable. But it seems he intruded on an already messy script that had no idea what kind of movie he wanted to be. Maybe I misunderstood this movie or something, but one minute you go from Wanda killing thousands of people to a joke about mustard. Both post-credit scenes were really bad, not even the Bruce Campbell cameo made me laugh. It has some decent horror elements and some good music and some pretty decent acting, but other than that, Doctor Strange: The Multiverse of Madness is really awful. It's better than Black Widow and Eternals, but I don't think that's saying much because I would never watch those movies again. It was a pretty worthless and disappointing experience that I'm mad I didn't really get much from because I was really excited for it. Honestly, I don't know if I'm ever going to watch another MCU movie or show after this. I mean, the next one sure doesn't look very good. I don't really like to give number ratings to movies anymore, but just for the sake of this video, I'm going to give Multiverse of Madness a very solid and unfortunate 2 out of 10. Thank you guys so much for watching. If there's anything you can take away from this video, it's that you should definitely go see Everything Everywhere All at Once. It literally handles the multiverse much better than this movie does. And it has Rakakuni.